Good morning. This is October 29th, Saturday, and welcome to a morning service of reflection at Cathedral Church of All Saints in Halifax. My name is Gordon, and I'm a parishioner at All Saints. This morning's reflection is from the epistle of Peter to the churches in Asia Minor. Chapters 3, verses 14 to 18, and I'm reading from the International Version of the Bible. Peter writes, "But even if you should suffer what is right, you are blessed. Do not fear threats. Do not be frightened, but in your hearts revive Christ the Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. Keep a clear conscience so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. For it is better, if it is God's will, to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. For Christ also suffered once for the sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. So he was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit." Peter is one of the best known of Jesus' followers. The very mention of his name conjures up stories about the apostle who failed at walking on the water, the apostle who was rebuked by Jesus, "Get thee behind me, Satan," the one who, in a fit of rage, attacked a man in the Garden of Gethsemane, or perhaps the apostle who, despite declaring his loyalty to Jesus, denied him 3 times. But we don't often say, "Oh yes, Peter, he's the apostle who wrote an encouraging epistle to the struggling churches of Asia Minor." In his epistle, Peter presents himself as an elder who is sharing the wisdom and advice with the fledgling churches of Asia Minor. Although there is little explicit description of their suffering, Peter makes some 17 references to it. At one point, he describes their suffering as a fiery ordeal. The epistle is apparently written from Rome around 60 to 65 AD, just before Nero launched his violent attacks on the Roman Christians. As an elder in the Church of Rome, Peter was no stranger to persecution and suffering. The epistle clearly shows his empathy for the churches in Asia Minor and his concern for their plight. He focuses his advice on the central issue of the apparent dissonance between a life of faith and suffering. This is a difficulty which still haunts Christians today. If we live in faith and are doing the will of God in Christ, why do we suffer? Peter's answer to this conundrum is by saying that if it is God's will, it is better to suffer for doing good. Indeed, we could get no better example than Jesus himself, who willingly bore tremendous suffering to do the will of God. It was through Jesus' suffering, Peter says, that we have been bought to God. So Peter encourages endurance and calls for perseverance. He tells Christians in Asia Minor to hold firm to the truth which comes from God through Christ. He says, "Do not compromise your faith." Peter would remember all too well the temptation to compromise when faced with danger. He had failed Jesus in the high priest's courtyard. But he also discourages Christians from taking rash and impetuous action. That, he says, simply makes things worse and undermines our ability to witness Christ to the world. Again, he is speaking from experience. He had behaved in exactly that way when he cut off a man's ear in the Garden of Gethsemane. So the epistle leaves us with an interesting question. How could this bumbling and impetuous fisherman presume to give sage advice to the churches in Asia Minor? The answer is simple. You see, the fisherman had grown spiritually in Christ. When the risen Lord had said to Peter, "Feed my sheep and follow me," John 21, the bumbling, impetuous fisherman who had failed the earthly Jesus had been forgiven by the risen Lord. What more could he have asked for? How could he turn back after that? So Peter's epistle to the churches in Asia Minor is not simply words of encouragement. It is a living witness to the power of his encounter with the risen Lord. The one who became the risen Lord saw more in Peter than he could possibly have imagined. The very thought of this is echoed in the Eucharistic doxology. Glory be to God, whose power working in us can do infinitely more than we can ask or imagine. So let us summarize Peter's advice to the Christians in Asia Minor into a sort of prayer. Lord, let all circumstances nurture our faith. Let us hold fast to that faith irrespective of suffering. And let us, like Peter, continue to grow spiritually in Christ. Lord, you know every broken heart, every pain, those spoken and unspoken. There are many tears in this life. Lord, please draw near to all who grieve. Remember us of your closeness, remind us of your closeness and your presence. Remind us that you are with us always. May we leave every tear and every ache at your heart, of our hearts at your feet. For we trust you that these realities and these feelings are real, and we know that you are sovereign over all. Amen.